There are things you do on impulse that you spend years trying to understand, not because they were wrong necessarily, but because some part of you already knew something your conscious mind refused to process. That night, I grabbed my keys, my jacket, and my bag. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't write a note. I just walked out of that apartment at 2:09 a.m. and kept moving forward. I never looked back at the door. I still don't know exactly what I was running from, or if running is even the right word. If this sounds familiar to you, if you've ever left somewhere without being able to explain why, I want you to leave that in the comments. And if you're new here, subscribe. These stories don't have neat endings. That's the point. I had been living in that apartment for 14 months. Third floor, corner unit, building on Rua do Contorno. The kind of place that looks fine in photos. High ceilings, old wooden floors, 2 windows that faced the back alley. I moved in during February. The previous tenant had left some things behind, a coat rack near the door, a small calendar on the kitchen wall still showing October, a single glass on the counter. The landlord said he'd clear it all. He never did. I didn't mind at first. You adapt. You put your things around someone else's leftovers and eventually it starts to feel like yours. But the apartment always had a sound problem. Not loud sounds, just the wrong ones. A creak from the hallway that didn't match foot traffic. The faint suggestion of movement in the unit above, even after I confirmed it had been vacant since I moved in. By month 4, I had stopped noticing. Or I had trained myself to stop noticing. There's a difference, and I didn't understand that distinction until much later. The night it started, the night that eventually led to me leaving, was a Tuesday. I know because I had a meeting at 8 a.m. the next day that I was already dreading. It was 11:52 p.m. I was in bed, not sleeping. The sound came from the kitchen, not a crash, not something breaking, just a single deliberate sound, like a glass being carefully set down on a hard surface. I lay still for probably 3 minutes. I've learned since then that 3 minutes is a long time to be motionless in a dark room listening for something you can't name. I told myself it was the building settling. Old buildings expand and contract at night with temperature shifts. That's true. That's a real thing. I had used that explanation before and it had always been enough. I got up, turned on the kitchen light. Nothing was out of place. The single glass, the one the previous tenant left, was exactly where I always kept it, on the left side of the sink. I hadn't moved it in weeks, except it wasn't on the left side. It was in the center. I stood there for a long time looking at it. I picked it up, put it back on the left, went back to bed, lay in the dark for another 40 minutes before I finally slept. I didn't tell anyone. There was nothing to tell. A glass moved slightly on a counter. That's not a story. That's nothing. I know how it sounds. But over the following 3 weeks, small things kept shifting. A chair angled differently than I left it. The kitchen calendar, the old one still showing October, removed from the wall and placed face down on the counter. A drawer that I always left closed, open by about 4 centimeters. None of it was dramatic. None of it happened while I was watching. It was always between moments, between leaving and returning, between sleeping and waking. I changed my locks at the end of week 2. I told the locksmith I had lost my spare key. I watched him work, and I didn't explain anything else. The drawer was open again the following morning. At 1:33 a.m. on a Thursday, I heard footsteps above me, clear, measured, slow, crossing from one end of the unit to the other, then stopping. I sat up in bed. I counted. I waited. 11 seconds of silence. Then the footsteps returned, crossing back in the same direction. Then nothing. The next day I talked to the building superintendent. His name was Benedito. He was a quiet man in his 60s, who I had spoken to maybe 4 times in 14 months. I asked him, as casually as I could, if someone had moved into the unit above mine. He looked at me for a moment before answering. He said no. He said that unit had been empty since the previous tenant left in September. He said there had been some paperwork issues with the new tenant, that it kept getting delayed. He said no one should be up there. I asked if maybe maintenance had been doing work at night. He said no. He said he would check the access log for the stairwell door. He seemed like he believed me. That was somehow worse than if he hadn't. He called me the next afternoon. He said the log showed no entries for that floor after 6 p.m. He said the unit had been inspected that morning and everything was undisturbed. He said if it continued, I should contact him immediately. I thanked him. I hung up. I stood in my kitchen for a while holding the phone. That night, at 1:33 a.m. exactly, I woke up before the footsteps started. I don't know how I knew. I was just awake. And then, 11 seconds later, they began. The last night was a Friday. Nothing dramatic had happened that week. That was almost the problem. The quiet felt deliberate, like something adjusting its behavior. Like it had noticed I was paying attention. I had dinner alone. I watched something on my laptop. I went to bed at 11:15 p.m. I was almost asleep when I heard the front door. Not opening. It was locked. I had checked 3 times, but the handle moved. The slow, careful rotation of someone testing from the outside. I didn't move. I watched the digital clock on my nightstand. 12:47 a.m. The handle moved once, then stopped. Then silence. I waited 20 minutes. Then I got up, turned on every light in the apartment, and stood in the hallway looking at the door. Nothing had changed. No marks, no sign of anything. I walked to the kitchen. The glass was in the center of the counter. I had not moved it. I went back to my room. I put on clothes. I put my phone, my wallet, and my keys into my jacket pocket. I packed one bag, not carefully, not completely. I just started putting things in and stopped when it felt like enough. At 2:09 a.m. I walked to the front door. I unlocked it. I opened it. The hallway outside was empty and lit and completely ordinary. I stepped out. I pulled the door closed behind me. I walked to the stairwell, down 3 flights, and out of the building into the cold air. I did not look back at the building. I don't know why. It wasn't a decision I made consciously. I just kept walking forward until I reached my car, and then I drove. I stayed with a friend for 2 weeks. I told her there had been a problem with the apartment. She didn't ask for details. I never went back to collect the rest of my things. The landlord kept the deposit. I let him. I don't know what was happening in that apartment. I don't have an explanation that would satisfy anyone, including myself. What I know is that I left at 2:09 a.m. on a Friday in November, and every time I've tried to describe why, this is the closest I can get. Some things don't resolve, they just end.